Now it's time to get started. We're going to go through Module 1. I'm just going to go through one of these blank templates that can help you to study the content. Here are just some ideas for you, some suggestions. I call it best practices. The students that have been successful in completing this class with a passing grade have done these things. They complete the Start Here activities as soon as possible so that they can start with the activities. They submit their quizzes on time. They're not late because 10 points on each, even if you make 100 on every test, it can make a big difference at the end. They engage in those activities that are included in each chapter, and they complete a study sheet for each chapter within each module. Then let's get started on chapter 1. We're going to look, here's the blank template that I've made available for you. You can use it digitally and just make your copy, save as chapter 1, chapter 2, whatever. And you don't have to use this. It's just a suggestion to help you get all the content organized in a way that it's just easier to learn it. So you're going to put your chapter here in your terms. Like on chapter 1, on page 1, you have um, key terms. You have all those terms, but there's a whole lot more terms than that. Once we go through the chapter, you're going to see. So you can do one of two ways. You can write out the terms here, and you can list them, starting with anaerobic, ending with pyroptosis, and you can write those out. You can look them up in the content on the next few pages, or you can go back in the back of your book. Everybody knows where your appendices and your glossary is. So you can go to the glossary on page 654, and you can start looking up those terms and go ahead and write them out. Not word for word, just enough to let you know what that term means. And you can do it that way, or you can complete these terms as you go through the content. So write your terms here. Your first headline in the text is you're going to put here. For chapter 1, it's going to say, what is pathophysiology and why do I need to study it? That's your first headline. Content, anything important, you're going to type in here. There's going to be the terms, just like the terms that you've already written and you possibly may have looked up. Some of them may not be in the key terms. Pathophysiology, do you think it's probably important that you know the definition for that? I can bet you do. You will need to know that. That's probably a test question. So what is the term pathophysiology mean, and why do we need to study it? That's the whole gist of chapter 1. Pathophysiology is the study of functional or physical changes in the body. So everybody took anatomy and physiology. That's normal structure and function. Pathophysiology, I consider abnormal structure and function. Something went wrong and the function or the structure has changed in a way that it's affected someone's health or well-being. So why do we study it is because we need to know what happened, what caused that change. Was it smoking? Then we can stop smoking. Was, that's just the way it works. We figure out what the cause was and we try to prevent, because obviously prevention is much easier and more cost effective than treating. So that's your first headline and your content. You're going to have text, especially in chapter 1, you're going to have lots and lots and lots of terms, more so than what were in the key terms. So keep that in mind. If it's a blue word, you need to know it. If it's an italicized word, you need to know it. There's boxes. These boxes can be very important. Under your second headline for chapter 1, which would be understanding health and disease, there's actually a box. So under content, you would put box. On page 2, it has 7 steps to health. And you would mark those bullets or you would list them 1 through 7. You very possibly could see those as well. Third headline, concept and scope of pathophysiology. There's content, there's another box. Pay special attention to just continue filling it. You may need more than 5 headlines. Feel free to add to the box. You just right click it, insert, column to the left, to the right, above or below, so to expand on this. But take a special look on page 6, etiology, causes of disease. There are tons and tons and tons of terminology between page 6 and page 7, all the way over to page 9. And they're italicized, they're blue, And a lot of this is just that. Let's take a look at page 6, manifestations. I don't know which headline it is. We're just going to say it's the fourth one. And halfway through the page, on the right side on page 6, manifestations. These are clinical evidence or effects, signs and symptoms of disease. And then it goes on right below it to say your signs. Those are objective, which just means that anyone can see them. There are symptoms, which are subjective. My special needs son says it hurts right here when he's having an asthma attack, and he says feel, and I'm like, honey, I can't feel that pain. That is subjective. He can feel it, and I can see if he's having retractions, but I can't feel that pain. So the subjective is just that person's feelings, pain and nausea. And we use these to diagnose particular problems. So this is how I want you to try to attack these chapters. It's a lot of content, and like I said, it's a very, very fast-paced semester for you this summer. But if you do it this way, it kind of helps you to keep it all in context. This is a short chapter. It's only 13 pages, but it has got so much content. So kind of try to keep it in a headline so that you can associate what we were talking about for each individual definition. So what we found here was, where did we find? Let me find it. I've lost my page. This one was under characteristics of disease. The major headline for this one, or heading, was under basic terminology of patho. And then characteristics. Oops, I'm dyslexic to a degree, always. Okay, so that just kind of helps you to keep in your mind what was that term talking about, and always give an example if you can. If you need to give an example, like I did with my son's chest pain, and that helps you to remember it, then give yourself an example of some sort in order to retain that information. So that's how we're going to tackle these chapters this summer. Okay, here is chapter 1. I've already kind of filled some of these out. I'll share this one with you as well. So you can look under two different areas. The disease index is on page 645 to 652, and then the glossary on 654. You can look that up. This is, again, pathophysiology, apoptosis, pyroptosis, and then we're going to go on to that next heading, and it's going to be 7 steps to health. List those. Then there's primary, secondary, tertiary prevention, and there are goals, and the disease process diagnosis, etiology, predisposing factors. More terms on page 6 and 7. Disease prognosis, there's lots more terms. Study questions. Here is something, let me find it, starting on page 13. Your study questions are very helpful as well to help you to put the content that you just read over into action. So number 1, choose a specific disease and prepare an appropriate list of 6 terms that you could use to describe this disease and define each of the terms. And then number 2 is define and give an example. So anytime you do, as I said, anytime you do write out a term, try to give you an example if it's a disease that you're thinking about, so that in your mind you can kind of see that term with associated with something so that it just makes more sense. So they have etiology, incidence, precipitating factors, all the way to sequela. And then number 3, differentiate between metaplasia and malignant neoplasm. Number 4, describe the changes in a cell that lead to the following. And they have that. There's all the way up to number 7. All right, so that will be helpful. And then there's also, before that, there's chapter summary. I'll find it. Chapter summary. If there's something that you're like, oh yeah, I remember that, I need to try to remember it a little better, then just go ahead and like I said, briefly type that in as well. The thing to try to remember and we'll go through this as I'll make short little videos for different modules um, when there's a more difficult concept, and we're going to get into that in some of the further chapters. This is pretty much terminology, this first chapter. Chapter 26 is also one of the chapters that we're going to have included in this test. I'm turning there now. Stress and associated problems, again, a very short chapter, but it's got a lot of information in it. When we get to that chapter, we're going to talk about some of the harder concepts to grasp. But to get started, go ahead and get on your chapter 1, get it completed so you can get to those activities. Let me briefly go over chapter 26 with you. I'm just going to hit a couple of highlights. You'll have to go over the rest of the chapter by yourself, but I just want to kind of review the process. So we'll put chapter 26. You might even want to put the title of the chapter here, your terms. Remember, the key terms are not going to be the only terms you need to remember. There are also terms scattered throughout the text. So do your terms. Let's go to the first headline, which is Review of the Stress Response. We're going to go to page 612, and we're going to start here right after the Think About box. And SEAL originally defined 3 stages in the stress response. In the alarm stage, the body's defenses are mobilized by the hypothalamus, the sympathetic nervous system, and the adrenal glands. So we have to kind of remember that those are the responsible parts that affect our defense and mobilization. Okay, in the second or resistant stage, hormone levels are elevated, the body system operates at peak, and the final stage is exhaustion, and the body is unable to respond any further. It's depleted all of the hormones, everything is depleted, and these increased demands have caused damage. And you have a figure 26.1 at this point. You can see the process that they talked about. You have the norepinephrine, you have the adrenal medulla, you have the anterior pituitary, the adrenal cortex, other feedback mechanisms, and this kind of addresses the process of stress. And then you go down here, the significant effects, back on page 612 in your text at the bottom. Significant effects of this response include, and again, on the effects it has up here. What causes increased blood pressure? The norepinephrine. What causes bronchodilation? The epinephrine. It's important to kind of try to start making those associations between what's causing it, because that is your key in learning pathophysiology and then advancing into a nursing program, is to be able to identify not just that the blood pressure is elevated, but what's caused that blood pressure to elevate. And it prevents you from having to memorize so many facts if you can just get the patho at the cellular level. And if you can figure that out and get that down, then it just comes easier to remember the signs and symptoms that you need to remember. Then you're going to go to stress and disease. There's some statistics there. Potential effects of prolonged or severe stress on page 614. You're going to put all those headings in. There are case studies as well. You have some case studies in your content under modules that you'll be looking at and going through, and you can do these as well, these case studies. There's your chapter summary and your study questions. And it's a very short chapter. Then you're going to move on to chapter 28 and go through all your activities and take your quiz, and week 1 will be completed, guys.